We are in the middle of exploring the four cornerstones of mindfulness, these foundations upon which we establish mindfulness. And we've looked at how the body is the substrate, it's the starting point for our journey. And it's now time to move on to the second foundation, which is mindfulness of feelings. This is not separate from the body, it's like a natural continuation of the first one. And as we'll see, mindfulness of feelings really provide a key to understanding the mind, and a key also to unlocking deep habitual patterns of the mind. So first, it'll be important to understand what we mean by feelings, because the word has many different meanings in English. The Pali term is Vedana, and it refers to something more specific. It's a more narrowly defined term. It refers to the pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral qualities of sensation that we experience moment by moment in sense contact. Right? So we hear a sound, or we feel a touch, a smell, a taste, or there's a sight. There can be a mental phenomena like a thought or a memory. And when we become conscious of that contact, we experience it as a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral sensation in the body. So perhaps a more accurate description of Vedana is feeling tones or hedonic tones. And it is this precise and specific meaning of feelings that makes it so powerful, because it constitutes the key link in the chain of reactivity that cause suffering in our lives. So the way this plays out is that, let's say we experience something painful or some uncomfortable experience. It can be something simple like the sounds of nails against a chalkboard. It's a very uncomfortable sound and we don't like it. There's a sense of pushing it away. We're trying to fight the experience. And this adds a second arrow. So the first arrow, it represents the pain itself. This is the uncomfortable experience. And although it stinks, it's part of life. We cannot avoid it. The second arrow is the mental pain. This is the suffering that we add on top of the first arrow. And the point is that the second arrow is more painful than the first one. This is where the suffering is usually. And the second point is that it's avoidable. It's not inherent in the experience itself, right? The sound is just the sound. Or in the words of the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, we are not disturbed by what happens to us, but by our thoughts about what happens to us. So I had this experience the other day when I was out. I was out in the forest and I noticed a hunger in the body, and there was some sensation there, and this triggered a whole story in my mind. Like looking at the watch, and it's already past lunchtime. It's going to take me quite a while to get back home and prepare something, and by then I might be grumpy, and then I'll have a late lunch, maybe may not be hungry for dinner. So there was a whole reaction, there was a whole story going on. And once I noticed and I came back to the sensation of the hunger, it was as if this second arrow and all the mental suffering just dropped away. The sensation of the hunger, it was totally tolerable. It wasn't that bad at all, in fact. And this is how it often works. And you may think that these are insignificant examples, like an uncomfortable sound or a slight hunger. But the point is that regardless of the experience and the situation, our tendency to react is the same. We react to discomfort with aversion, with non-acceptance. And we create this mental suffering for ourselves, and we keep the pain alive through the stories that we tell ourselves. And this has actually huge consequences in our lives, because the process itself reinforcing. Aversion conditions more aversion. So, and it happens until the point where we become unable to be with pain and discomfort. What often happens at that point is we turn towards sense pleasure as a means of escape. We look for some pleasant sensation to avoid whatever the discomfort is. And we experience some pleasure and it feels good. Naturally, we like it. The problem is we want more of it. We want to hold on to it. We resist when it passes away, and we start grasping for more. And this grasping or clinging, it conditions more clinging. The same with neutral feelings that we tend to overlook. We may not think of them as important, or they're just getting in the way of something else, or we don't even pay attention to them, and we don't know what's happening. This ignoring, this ignorance, it conditions more ignorance, confusion and delusion in the mind. So there's a story or a simile to illustrate this, where there's hunters using a tar trap to catch monkeys. And the monkey is full of greed, and he reaches for the trap and gets stuck with his paw. And then trying to free himself with the other paw, that also gets stuck. And then using his leg to free his paws, the leg gets stuck. And then the other leg gets stuck. And eventually he tries with his mouth, and the mouth gets stuck. And so in the end, the monkey is trapped, right? It's at the total mercy of the hunter. And we often do this in our lives. We somehow get caught, and then our strategies for freeing ourselves further ensnares us. So in a way, we are, just like the monkey, we're seduced by sense pleasure, or by Mara, you could say, in the tradition. Mara represents an embodiment of all the forces that stand in the way of liberation. So often these temptations are described as having poisonous roots and honeyed tips, right? So we look for freedom in the wrong places. So through this process, we get caught in a cycle of running toward or pushing away, and there's no real equanimity, there's no freedom in the mind. We are at the whim of these ever-changing Vedana, moment by moment. And on some level, we're all aware of this process. There's often some background awareness when we're engaging in some indulgent behavior, like some sense pleasure, and perhaps the behavior itself is harmful or detrimental to our health. That there's some addictive quality to what we're doing, and there's often a judgment in the background. Or sometimes there's just a recognition that this pleasure isn't deeply satisfying. It's not giving us this happiness or joy or peace that we were longing for in the first place. And yet we keep doing the same thing due to our deep conditioning in the mind. So this is not to put down sense, pleasure, or enjoyment. We're talking about the attachment part and how that is getting in the way of our freedom. So we all have a taste of this addictive tendency, and we're all aware of this sense of getting trapped, of getting caught. But we also have a taste of freedom. We know what it feels like when the mind is open and clear and non-reactive. It feels like, being able to breathe. And so how can we use mindfulness to cultivate more of this breathing room and more of this freedom? So the first set of instructions is to simply be mindful of the Vedana. So experiencing a pleasant feeling, we're aware that this is a pleasant feeling. Experiencing some pain or discomfort, we're aware this is a painful feeling. And experiencing some neutral feeling, we're aware this is a neutral feeling. Again, it's this quality of bare knowing, of seeing it as it actually is, without elaboration and interpretation and stories, right? We see that we don't have to react, we don't have to panic, we don't have to know where the feeling comes from even. We simply attend to it with mindfulness. And we can just note, pleasant feeling, it feels like this. And negative feeling or painful feeling, it feels like this. And for those of you who have been to an insight meditation retreat, at least in the Goenka school, this is what we do for 10 days straight. We stay at the root level of the sensation without following the impulse that come up. Because this is the link in the chain where we can cut the reactivity and decondition the mind. So it's very simple, but it's not so easy to do because we have a deep conditioning in the mind. And the reaction is so immediate that we often don't even recognize that we're doing it. And this causes us to project our aversion and our craving externally. We think that the object out there is what's going to make me happy. Or the object out there, this person, that is the cause of my suffering. And to make it even more challenging, there are whole industries that benefit from us having this belief, right? These are really strong and powerful forces that work to strengthen this conditioning of our minds. So we could say that Mara is quite strong, and at times it may feel overwhelming. But the good news is that it is possible to retrain the mind. And we can see actually that in any given moment we have the capacity to stay with what is without reacting. And we train this not by judging our behavior, but by becoming aware of our behavior, of illuminating it and inviting this quality of curiosity and investigation. So we scan our experience, and whenever we find ourselves caught up in reactivity or some distress, we simply recognize it with curiosity, like, this is the second arrow, that's interesting. And so we illuminate what is going on. And we see this distress as an effect of overlooking the initial feeling, that is what we're reacting to. And once there is mindfulness, we can come back to that original sensation in the body. And oftentimes what we find is that it is tolerable. It's not as bad as we thought. The suffering is often in that mental second arrow that we've added on top of that original feeling. So this is how we train to decondition the mind. And if it's a pleasant experience, we can be with the enjoyment of that pleasure without the attachment. And this makes the experience all the more satisfying. So when we can stay with our feeling tones, with this bare knowing, with mindfulness, it is as if we can process our experience in real time. We meet the experience head on without resistance, without pushing away, and there's nothing to dwell on. It's like the experience has a chance to express itself and then pass through. There's no accumulation of unfulfilled experience in the body. And you might think of this as managing a debt, right? We don't take up more loans over time, but we process it in real time. Or in the words of, in the Buddhist language, you could say that we stop generating karma. And once we do, it's an automatic process starts that enables us to actually pay the debt, right? We also burn karma from the past because we enable experiences that have been unfulfilled and locked in the body to come up, express themselves, and pass through. So in this way also, mindfulness of Vedana, the second foundation, is also a path of emotional healing and integration. So the bottom line to understand, I think, is that when we're not mindful of our feelings, when we overlook them, these feeling tones, they condition craving and aversion and ignorance. They condition our mind and they keep us stuck. And when we can meet them with mindfulness, with bare knowing, when we are aware of our feeling tones, the opposite is true. They actually become the fuel for our inner transformation. And by being aware of these Vedana, we actually cultivate equanimity and compassion and freedom. So in the next frame, we'll take a deeper look at the mechanics of these feelings, these Vedana, and also how to practice with them.